freedom of speech doesn't exist in the UK. But first, Twitter. Twitter is the perpetrator of division. It's an echo chamber possessing a monopoly on nonsensical safe space lunacy with an aim to distract the easily influenced from the real world and encourage a victim mindset in people who would otherwise be normal, contributing members of society. Instead of word-policing woke activists intent on defending the next man against bigotry so long as he isn't cisgendered. Only the definition for bigotry has been purposely altered by a loud minority. The word has been redesigned to swallow up anyone who questions the ever-changing normal, only to then spit them back out into a metaphorical meat grinder that devours opposing opinions and aims to undermine self-thinking, self-assured people and strip them of their own unique character in order to condition everyone to think the same way, reinforced with a disguise of some vague, elusive redefinition of what it means to be a truly hateful person, and lambasting those who don't follow in the footsteps of wokeness with a label that implies sheer hatefulness like racist, sexist, transphobic, homophobic, and so on, which in itself is an easy and effective way to shut down any challenge to their fragile way of thinking, because opposing opinions are too emotionally damaging to the same people who made themselves emotionally vulnerable to opposing opinions. With that in mind, it shouldn't be surprising that the average Twitter inhabitant, usually a blue-haired propagandist who's too one-dimensional to realise that they disseminate 1939 Germany vibes by trying to make everyone think the same way they do, and the same people who have blown up the phrase freedom of speech does not mean freedom of consequences, even though that is exactly what freedom of speech means. To speak freely implies exactly that. To speak free. To speak without direct consequences corresponding to the words that you have chosen to use. However, in the UK, you can face legal repercussions for the words that come out of your mouth, which is why in this country in particular, freedom of speech, true freedom of speech, does not exist. A straightforward, low-hanging fruit argument to form in response to me saying words are not deserving of consequences would be to say, well, threats are words, and surely threats deserve consequences, legal consequences. And to that, I do partially agree. Partially because although threats should not be void of consequence, if someone is threatening you, their speech alters and becomes something much more than just speech. It becomes speech that implies action. Action that in itself isn't designated as just speech alone. To threaten is to suggest action, and that goes beyond the boundaries of words. In my opinion, there's a comprehensible distinction between saying something offensive that doesn't imply action and remains verbal, and verbally suggesting action. So to put it simply, when speech evolves and becomes more than just the use of words, it's no longer just speech. Something that isn't just speech clearly doesn't deserve the protection of the idea of freedom of speech. And on that basis, threats themselves have nothing to do with what I'm talking about today. Another argument that could be formed to support the idea that some speech is deserving of consequences would be hate speech. And I feel like a burning question for a lot of people watching this, seeing what I'm arguing for, would be, do you think hate speech constitutes as just speech? Is hate speech something that should be protected? And as controversial as this may be to say, I do believe that the current definition of hate speech is something that should be protected. I don't say that lightly. I'm saying it because I feel that the line that has been drawn under hate speech has been drawn wrong. The current idea of hate speech has become one of the main differentiators between saying something to someone possibly insulting in nature and it being seen as just an unpleasant exchange of words, and saying the same thing to someone possibly insulting in nature, still an unpleasant exchange in words, but now those words can land someone in prison, even if they remain as just words. Personally, beyond jokes, I do not agree with attacking an element about someone that they cannot change if you are doing so with genuine sincerity. But my own personal discrepancies with actual verbal abuse don't outweigh my opinion that to be able to speak freely, when that speech is limited to just speech, shouldn't be policed, however much you disagree with what the other party is saying. Once hate speech turns into a non-speech related hate crime, that to me is the key difference. In my eyes, there should be a definitive line drawn in the sand between someone saying, I don't like you because you are this, and someone saying, I'm going to hurt you because you are this. I feel that the latter should be criminal and the former should not be. As dramatic as it may sound, the second you allow speech to become punishable based on what you do or don't agree with, is the same second that you become complacent with the idea that someone else should be given control over certain elements of your life. And once that door opens, it will never close again, because control is far too valuable to give up to the same people whose goal is to control you. Regardless of the level of foundation that you may think your argument has, or however much your argument is reinforced by like-minded people, in my strong-rooted opinion, to impose a strict binding control over what someone is allowed to say because it goes against what you have deemed to be right is totally wrong, especially when the threat of imprisonment is being dangled over people's heads for using words. Now, on the topic of the law being brought in to dictate speech, I myself was contacted over a year ago by a police officer over a word I chose to use. It wasn't a word I used on this YouTube channel or any of my public social medias, but rather for a comment that I made on a private Facebook post that had 2 likes. The original post that I commented on was made by my friend, and it read, "Yo, really post all about your lives on Facebook. Turn off the iPhone 7, mate. No one cares. You're ugly. It's cool." The post was quite clearly generalising the people that my friend had on his Facebook, who he felt kept going on about their lives on social media unjustly. And on top of that, the way it was worded makes it very clear that this post was a joke. However, as we know, context often proves meaningless to people who have a strong narrative to push. So with that in mind, a very strange woman then replied to my friend, calling him sick in the head, scum, and a racist, based on this one Facebook post. Now, me being a natural wind-up that I am, it's in my blood, I replied to this white woman saying, "This are mad." And she, let me tell you, she did not like that. In fact, she was so offended by those 3 words that she got in touch with the police. I don't use my real last name on Facebook because people are always finding my Facebook who watch me on YouTube, blah, blah, blah. So she must have just told the police officers my YouTube channel, because I didn't get a visit from them, I didn't get a letter, I didn't get anything to my address, a phone call, nothing like that. Instead, I got an email to my business email that is public on my YouTube channel from a police officer regarding this Facebook post, and it reads as follows. "Bradley, a complaint has been received by police that on the 9th of August 2020, you posted comments on one Facebook posts that include the racially offensive word on 3 times occasions, despite the fact that people had already objected on the thread to the racist term being used. No further action will be taken on this occasion. However, please bear in mind that it is an offence under Section 127 of the Communications Act 2003 to send a grossly offensive message by means of public electronic communications network. Please bear in mind that if there are any complaints of any further posts deemed racist, it could leave you liable to prosecution." So I replied saying this: "Steve, as you should know, a message which does not create fear or apprehension in those to whom it is communicated, or who may reasonably be expected to see it, falls outside this provision. A word such as that, in the context that it was used by me as a joke towards a white person, is for starters not racially charged, and therefore is obviously not meant to be taken seriously, making it so what I said is neither racist, menace, nor a threat. If we're going to be completely ignorant to context, then I'd like to make a complaint about yourself, Steve, for quoting the word back to me, as I deem it as offensive, and I'd like to remind you that it is an offence under Section 127 of the Communications Act 2003 to send a grossly offensive message by means of a public electronic communications network. The woman who has reported this to yourselves has left out grievous amounts of context which completely dismantles and undermines any argument that what was said by anyone in that conversation was racist or could leave anyone liable to prosecution. For me, this borders on harassment from her. Normally, I would report a member of the police force for issuing me what I have deemed as quite a hostile email without the context of what he's talking about. But on this occasion, I'm going to assume that you're just doing your job, and I'll leave it there. Once we open the floodgates of word policing, we create an environment that is littered with animosity, where some by nature will be too anxious to even speak on certain things out of fear that they will face legal repercussions, whereas others will inevitably feel a sense of empowerment from this nanny state given ability, granting dark-hearted people the means to destroy lives at will based off of what comes out of another person's mouth. Context should always be extensively considered when it comes to trying to criminalise someone for how they have chosen to speak. But I'll take it a step further right now and say that the words that someone has chosen to use, irregardless of context, when those words stay as just words, should not be policed, period. Right now, there are laws in place that determine what we are allowed to say and how we are allowed to speak. And until that fact changes, we have to accept that in the UK, we do not have true freedom of speech.